All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us here tonight here at the beautiful Hemmingson Center. My name is Dr. Brian Henning. I'm Professor of Philosophy and Environmental Studies at Gonzaga here, and I also direct our Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment. It's my great honor to welcome you. As we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands of the Spokane tribal people, the people of the river, and that we only exist because we were invited to this community, the Jesuit founders of this university, by local tribes who had first invited us. And we'd like to recognize that that initial invitation was not always well respected. As a lot of you probably know, part of the founding story of Gonzaga is that although we were invited to the community by indigenous tribal elders in this area, when time came to admit the first students, we turned them away and didn't admit them for quite a long time. And so we have this sort of original sin at the beginning of our own institution to try and overcome. We're grateful to be part of this biotic community, and we ask for its support as we think together tonight. I'd like to note that we have a couple more events still coming up this semester that you can attend. The next one is, I believe, 2 weeks from today. Another alum of Gonzaga, Dr. Griffin Thompson, who's recently retired from the Department of State, who was a lead climate negotiator for the US. We'll be talking about the political and ethical dimensions of the renewable energy transition. And then several of our colleagues, along with Gonzaga Environmental Studies senior capstone students, will be talking about some of our extreme heat research in response partly to the 2021 heat dome. So we hope you come back to those events coming up. That second one is remote, and the first one will be, I believe, in this room here. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to read the last sentence of a report that came out today. Some of you might have heard that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report today, and this is the last line of the summary for policymakers. They said, "The cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health. Any further delay in concerted anticipatory global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all." The sentence is sort of remarkable by itself, but it's also even more impressive when you think about the fact that it had to be agreed to by all of the nations of the world, which it's amazing they ever publish anything, if you can imagine that standard. So we'll just sit with that new information as we get ready for our event tonight. Our speaker tonight is, as you know, is Kevin Kunz, co-founder of an engineering procurement and construction management startup here in Spokane. Kevin is currently focused on the development of a unique integrated utility management system intended to prevent flooding and pollution problems in urban, suburban, and rural neighborhoods while providing resilient utility infrastructure for communities impacted by climate change. And if I remember correctly, he's also a Gonzaga alum. Oh, dang. Zag at heart. Wow, I really blew that. We're still super excited to have you here. Zag at heart, Kevin Kunz.
Thank you all for your attendance this evening. You know, I want to take a moment to thank you, Dr. Henning, and the Center for Climate, Society, and Environment for providing me the opportunity to speak for you all today. It's been a great pleasure to attend speakers of the past, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity that our community has to learn and grow from the knowledge and insight set forth by the center. And I'll pull up my presentation here for you all. I'm a lifelong resident of Spokane, as I attended Gonzaga Prep just up the street, so we'll count it, right? Just up the street. And although I consider myself a lifelong Zag, given my love for basketball, I actually attended Washington State University just over a decade ago. Since then, what was a passion for stormwater management has evolved into an opportunity to advance utility management systems that our team believes can have an impact on cities as they attempt to resolve the infrastructure challenges of today in the face of a changing climate. Increased drought, extreme weather events, rising temperatures, among other factors, have exposed some new and often harsh realities for communities across the country. Transportation and utility infrastructure, that being water, broadband, and energy, most notably in disadvantaged communities, are being disruptive and can often remain off-grid for even weeks or months at a time. For millions, a changing climate is becoming all too familiar as these challenges increase with our Earth's temperature. Today, my intention is to provide you with some examples as to how our nation's water infrastructure has been engineered with the hopes of bringing insight into the current challenges of today. I then hope to inspire a brighter future that makes use of these same water infrastructure systems as an opportunity to improve overall utility as we attempt to build resilient infrastructure in the face of a changing climate. Does that sound okay with everyone? Okay, let's do this. To begin, we find ourselves in Chicago in 1850. At the time, Chicago just sat a few feet above the water level of Lake Michigan. After storms, the city streets would transform into swamplands with nowhere for the water to go, making transportation near impossible to navigate, as you see the water there in the streets. No drainage for the nation's transportation hub at the time presented a major problem for the future of Chicago. In 1850, the population of Chicago had grown to over 28,000 people, more than 6 times its size just 10 years before. And this growth was rapidly increasing. So much so that the Chicago Board of Sewage Commissioners deemed digging into Chicago's soils to install a network of pipes underground would be too expensive. That there's a blueprint of the plans there in 1857. At the time, they concluded that building a sewage and stormwater piping network above ground would be most practical. This engineered system would then let gravity carry sewage and stormwater from the city to the Chicago River. They then raised the city's elevation to sit above the new pipes. The plan? They dredged the Chicago River and used the fill to raise the city 10 feet. The challenge then was to raise the city's existing buildings to meet that new elevation. They used an engineering method or practice called the Pullman method, which is exactly how it sounds. They would place the foundation of a given building on jacks that would then be turned in unison and slowly raising those buildings. So you'd look out your window in Chicago in 1855 and you'd see upwards of 600 men each turning their jacks a quarter of a turn at the blow of a whistle. Soon enough, the city was 10 feet higher and the streets were much drier. But as Chicago grew, so did the water problems. By the late 19th century, rain events were bringing more pollution than ever to the Chicago River, and Lake Michigan's water quality was deteriorating. So the Chicago Board of Sewage Commissioners put their engineering hats on again, this time developing a plan to reverse the Chicago River and send the city's raw sewage and stormwater south in what eventually would become drainage to the Mississippi River. As you can see there, the water flow on the left flowed into Lake Michigan. You have your approximate continental divide, and they trenched all the way down to the Plains River there. Quite wild. In 1892, the Big Ditch, as the project was referred to, began construction. Thousands of laborers used new inventions like the steam shovel and dynamite to excavate 42 million tons of rock and soil to redirect the Chicago River's flow from Lake Michigan to the Mississippi. Understandably, downstream communities were not happy with the resulting pollution. So the city of Chicago ran propaganda promoting the engineered project as safe with slogans such as, "The solution to pollution is dilution," stating that the purifying qualities of Lake Michigan would make that water safe. Chicago knew they had to finish the project before they faced downstream lawsuits. And on January 1st, 1900, the city completed its final dig at the end of the project site, forever redirecting the flow of the Chicago River from Lake Michigan to the Mississippi, ultimately saving the city's main source of drinking water while preventing catastrophic flooding. I'd now like to forward us to the Clean Water Act of 1972. The federal government made clear the need to focus on regulating the discharge of sewage and stormwater from cities' underground piping into main bodies of water. The new mandates led city engineers to think big again, as the water pollution problem had become one of the worst in the nation, as Chicago had now grown over to 3.3 million people, making it the second largest city in the US and 10th in the world. Chicago embarked on one of the region's, or nation I should say, most ambitious and expensive infrastructure projects to date. The Tunnel or Reservoir Project, also known as the Deep Tunnel, a massive storage system that will be able to hold 20 billion gallons of water once completed. This project was signed into action in 1972 and is set to be finished in 2029, making this a 57-year project that has yet to be completed. The solution made sense at the time because Chicago's sewage still functioned within that same combined system developed by the Chicago Board of Sewage Commissioners. That is a combination of sewage and stormwater pipes underneath the city. Currently, just 1 to 2 inches of rainfall can overwhelm this new network, forcing sewage back through the pipes to where it came from. When this happens, a combination of sewage and stormwater flows into city streets and residents' basements in what we know as urban flooding. If there is still too much strain on the system, the city opens its floodgates, once again pouring a mixture of sewage and street runoff into local sources like the Chicago River and Lake Michigan, which is still the city's main source of drinking water. So you have 49 years later, 9 mayors and more than $4 billion invested after the Deep Tunnel project was commissioned, and urban flooding continues to plague residents, particularly in Chicago's disadvantaged communities. And some experts now say it's time for a new approach. Today, the Deep Tunnel project is facing issues just like Chicago's big engineering ideas of the past. This time, however, climate change is impacting the engineered design of the project. When completed, the Deep Tunnel will consist of 109 miles of underground tunnels and 3 reservoirs that will take on stormwater and sewage during heavy rain events. So you have 3 release points here, and I'd just like to note the sewage release points during some heavy rain events. They're in the Willamette, the Chicago, and there's a third one further south. Today, the Deep Tunnel is far from resolving localized flooding problems. The lead engineers of today have stated that the issue is now not a capacity problem, but rather a restriction problem, meaning that the piping infrastructure underneath the city is not able to handle the sheer volume of these new storm events in the era of climate change. One engineer has compared the deep tunnel system to a bathtub. If you don't have enough big straws to get to the bathtub, it doesn't matter how big the bathtub is. So stormwater simply can't drain into the deep tunnel system fast enough in certain areas of the Chicago community. The city is now encouraging engineered designs that focus on concepts that embrace what is known as green infrastructure, a concept that I will describe here in a moment. Our second water story is centered around the city of Los Angeles. In 1862, Southern California was already very naturally wet. Marshes, ponds, pools, dunes, meadows, and thickets. It was evident the impact water had on the physical layout of the region. However, the year also marks the Great Flood of 1862. When the state of California was just 12 years old, a storm lasting 43 days dropped 10 feet of rain on the entire state, flooding entire cities for months at a time. This occurred from what is called an atmospheric river. I'm glad I got some laughs out of that one, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar given the recent news down in California. This was essentially a 43-day river flowing over the state, dropping a water bomb which destroyed a fourth of the state's properties. The storm forever changed the state, which archived a disaster plan created by the United States Geological Survey in preparation for the next storm. They even have a name for that next big storm, ARK storm, ARKSTORM. The Great Flood of 1862 is pronounced to be the worst disaster to ever strike the state of California. Given this event, it's no wonder the ecological footprint of the land in California began to rapidly change not soon after. Water could be of no greater inconvenience to the citizens who inhabited the land at a period that just so happens to mark the beginning of the Second Industrial Revolution in North America. New ways of doing, tremendous opportunities for economic development, a rapid shift in urbanization were all merging in one time period. The think big engineering practices, similar to that of Chicago, were generating a paradigm shift in thought as to what life would look like in our cities. Over the next century, Californians continued to expand the LA basin, and along with it, the grading of streets. As we are all familiar with now, a network of underground storm pipes followed to get water away from structures as quickly as possible. The interruption of LA's natural environment is vast, a term that can also be used to describe the amount of impervious surface laid down in the Los Angeles basin. LA quickly became an asphalt and concrete jungle of sorts. In fact, the river itself is now concrete. A second catastrophic flood in 1938 brought more rain to the city of LA in one day than it usually does in an entire year. This wiped out bridges along the LA River and destroyed over 1,500 homes, forcing engineers to rethink the physical layout of the river itself. Over the next 30-year period following that storm, over 3.5 million barrels of concrete were poured into the river channel, transforming the natural water body from a river into a man-made flood control channel. Some estimate that an average of 60% of LA County watersheds are now paved over, and that includes the rivers themselves. When rain hits Los Angeles today, the stormwater is channeled to the city's over 2,000 storm drains and directly flows into that same concrete river. The stormwater is then pushed out through gravity to the Pacific Ocean as quickly as possible. The freshwater asset is gone before it came, this coming at a time when drought plagues the LA basin. Just like many cities across the West, climate change isn't necessarily changing the overall volume of rainfall quite yet. What is changing, rather, is the increased intensity of storms and when they in fact do occur. So in places like Los Angeles, for example, we often read and hear about the impact of drought. However, of equal significance is the record rainfall and flood events that occur during the winter months, similar to the over 5 inches of rain that fell on downtown LA in December of 2021, breaking a previous daily record set in 1888. This year's winter season has been equally as dramatic. Flooding and pollution problem issues still exist in a time of considerable drought. Now, I will say that recent storms have increased some reservoirs in LA by up to 81% this year. So that's very valuable for the state of California. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, an estimated 10 trillion gallons of untreated stormwater runoff containing raw sewage, fertilizer, oil, pesticides, bacteria, and other pollutants enter U.S. streams, rivers, and oceans annually from sewer systems, polluting the environment and drinking water supplies. In the broad scope, many of the infrastructure issues facing our nation can be traced back to the quantitative misrepresentation of what water industry professionals call the 100-year design storm metric. This refers to infrastructure that is engineered to withstand storms expected to occur once every 100 years. The issue with this data is it's not only outdated, but does not take into account a changing climate as weather patterns become more unpredictable. For example, you now hear about cities like Chicago experiencing 500-year storm events. Infrastructure in 43 states are currently designed with data collected no sooner than 2015. As depicted, rainfall records representing industry design storm criteria in the Pacific Northwest, they date all the way back to 1973. These issues will continue to accelerate, supposing that the NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Atlas 14 report, continues to provide data that is representative of the past and not the future. Even with the most up-to-date rainfall information, climate scientists warn that infrastructure is still likely to fail. Amending this infrastructure data is the first step in the right direction. Now, I promise there is hope. I'm going to take a second to grab a drink, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. So, how do we overcome these major challenges? The opportunity we see begins with a thought change, similar to that experienced by those who lived at the beginning of the second industrial revolution. The difference, however, is that the second industrial engineering practices of the past were most predominantly that of the Anthropocene, or human-centered focus. As Cardinal Cherney spoke about in Caring for Our Common Home in This World with This Climate, one of humanity's greatest flaws is the belief that we can engineer everything to fit the human paradigm, and this is simply misguided practice. Previous revolutions have taught us that thought change has happened before, and I'm here to tell you that this is hope for the future. We now have the opportunity to see ourselves, being the human race, as functional beings within an ecosystem that is not independent, but rather interconnected to our surrounding environment. This is also known as ecocentrism. We have an opportunity to build 21st century eco-centric infrastructure. Yes, this does include dense urban areas, and sure, we will rely on new engineering practices and the adoption of technology to reconnect our cities back to their natural environment. The good news, or further good news, is that our nation will be investing more into infrastructure in the next 2 decades than at any point in human history, as we again face this changing climate. Building an ecocentric society can take us to places that we have yet to comprehend, and I will stand in front of you today that and say that I truly, truly believe that. This good news continues. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or global goals, are a collection of 17 interlinked objectives designed to serve as a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. These goals have reached near global recognition, with all but 5 countries actively promoting these goals. One hopes the United States will adopt them in short order, as they offer innovative concepts a foundation to learn and grow from. In addition, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, that Dr. Henning mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, continues to provide assessment reports as a means of informing government bodies on the realities of climate change to increase awareness and preparedness. The continued growth and adoption of multilateralism shows promise for the planet as we advance into the 21st century. There is also promise in the growth of the revolutionary toolkit. As we reach the dawn of the 4th Industrial Revolution, creative solutions are expanding at an unprecedented rate. Rather than focusing on the 2nd industrial practices of assembly lines and electrification, now we have the opportunity to build physical infrastructure within cyber-physical systems, which are now and will continue to be a point of focus not just today for our team, but for companies and concepts all around the world. The 4th Industrial Revolution runs far beyond robotics, self-driving cars, and implantable medical devices. We can also use practices in artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, amongst others, to advance our physical infrastructure system. And this green revolution is currently underway. Although subtle, cities across the nation are focusing on a concept known as green infrastructure to meet their stormwater consent decrees. Broadly put, green infrastructure refers to keeping the raindrops where they fall, rather than running off to curb lines and into gutters at the end of the street. Green infrastructure collects this stormwater and infiltrates it back into the ground, reconnecting the precious asset back into the natural water cycle. Forms of green infrastructure include the planting of trees, restoring wetlands, and installing permeable materials rather than building additional underground piping and costly new centralized water treatment plants. Cities like Chicago and Los Angeles are placing concerted effort into expanding these practices on the ground at present time. However, green infrastructure has experienced sparse innovation since the exploratory phases of the market in the early 90s and 2000s due to lack of reliability of maintenance, along with the cost of interrupting underground utility upon its installation. And this is where our innovation stack comes into light. Starting in 2015, our team has placed concerted effort in developing our design concepts in order to advance that green infrastructure toolkit. The question we ask ourselves is, how can we provide developers with the best possible design to adapt for success in a changing climate? We realize that resilient infrastructure is imperative for cities to achieve and maintain their water goals. And in order to adapt for success, cities should be given the opportunity to tackle the myriad of issues. Of infrastructure problems, in a retrofit design that is easy to install and maintain, is cost-effective, and embraces the ecological, technological design approach for long-term resilience and utility management. The question became this: can we impact improvements in transportation, broadband, energy, and ecology while implementing an innovative solution to the stormwater issue at hand? We see the opportunity zone in optimizing the sidewalk. In the first half of the 20th century, the federal government focused on accommodating automobiles by shrinking sidewalks, while newer cities deprioritized pedestrian infrastructure. For example, an estimated 4,600 miles of sidewalk in Los Angeles are considered damaged. A recent study also indicates that 3 out of 5 scooter accidents occur at the sidewalk. Lastly, disadvantaged communities are again predominantly impacted by deteriorating sidewalks. We thought, why can't sidewalks themselves be permeable or able to capture that rainwater, rather than relying on the curb line to direct stormwater into gutters and into pipes? Our patented retrofit design modernizes the sidewalk while encouraging complete street concepts and calming transportation. By eliminating the existing curb line and relying on the sidewalk itself to manage runoff from the street, we can drastically reduce the overall volume of stormwater managed by existing stormwater systems, while providing an opportunity to upgrade the necessary above-ground infrastructure to increase safety for electric vehicle and pedestrian traffic. Precast sidewalk panels made with our permeable material technology will then be installed atop an engineered design that provides developers with an increased ability to connect stormwater back into the underlying soil, and again, that natural water cycle. We've made significant progress on improving the maintenance behind traditional permeable pavement by developing a technology that utilizes microscopic pores that have demonstrated a resistance to clogging at the surface. This would then provide opportunity for improved maintenance by allowing communities to clean green infrastructure at the sidewalk while using existing street sweep equipment. We would not want to reinvent the wheel here. I will further describe the permeable material technology here shortly, but first I will demonstrate the distributed utility system upon which this material will be installed. Now, let's take ourselves underground for a moment. Figure 3 illustrates a side section view of an improved sidewalk. 124 and 126 represent our permeable material technology by way of our precast sidewalk panels. Again, when I say permeable, I am referring to a hard surface that allows water to pass through. 129 represents the static sump portion of our stormwater filtration system. Our static sumps are large-sized detention blocks that utilize technology similar to that of the sidewalk panels, as mentioned before, while obtaining increased permeability. These detention blocks are installed directly below the upgraded sidewalk panels and act as an engineered soil of sorts. These detention tanks will be manufactured to infiltrate stormwater at a rate that coincides with the infiltration rate of the native soil in which it is installed upon. It's important to note that we plan for the vast majority of the stormwater collected by this sidewalk system to naturally seep into the ground below, as again, I highlight the essential benefit of green infrastructure, keeping the raindrops where they fall. Figure 4 illustrates a side section view, or a dynamic sump, a hollow cistern of sorts that is installed throughout the sidewalk and at the lowest down gradient point of a given installation. In relation to retrofit designs, this will be located in close proximity to the street's existing catch basin. Figure 10 is a side section view depicting how a series of static and dynamic sumps would work in cohesion with one another through a cascading arrangement. Now imagine a city block in which our engineered design begins to take on an extraordinary rain event. The sidewalk panels and static sumps begin to saturate with stormwater, filling the dynamic sumps represented in 112A and 112B. With gravity, stormwater will eventually reach the lowest down gradient dynamic sump, which is represented again in figure 4. Once an entire system within a city block reaches capacity, and I gotta give it a second to load here, okay. A float switch labeled in 134 of figure 4, equipped with LoRaWAN sensor capabilities, will inform a utility management control system that excess stormwater is in need of relocation. A software program connected to the utility management control system will then relocate this stormwater based on the most up-to-date atmospheric conditions. A recent breakthrough in artificial intelligence enables software to determine rainfall 90 minutes before it occurs, thus providing an opportunity for our distributed utility system to be proactive rather than reactive to storms and extreme weather events. A sump pump labeled in 115 of figure 4 in the lowest down gradient dynamic sump discharges excess stormwater from the dynamic sump into a water discharge line, which is labeled in 117 for relocation of this stormwater. Through this system, we plan to drastically reduce the overall volume of stormwater managed outside the location of which it falls, while opening the door for further innovation. Now, you may ask how this is done. Figure 13 displays a side sectional view of a large diameter stormwater pipe retrofitted to meet the needs of our distributed utility system. These stormwater pipes are an average of 3.5 feet in width. By drastically reducing the overall volume of stormwater managed by existing gray infrastructure networks, we have the opportunity to utilize the roughly 3.5 million miles of piping underneath U.S. cities as real estate for what we call a utility housing corridor. Non-intrusive, this design concept prevents the invasive construction methods associating with ripping up streets and replacing gray infrastructure and utility. A patented corridor includes electrical power lines, telecommunication or broadband utility lines, as well as the stormwater discharge line mentioned in the previous slide. The corridor will be manufactured from a flexible material to facilitate installation into pre-existing large diameter utility lines. Installation of the housing corridor can be accessed through pre-existing manhole covers that occur at roughly every 400 feet of pavement. The interior of the utility housing corridor can be filled with a setting foam, such as an expanding polyurethane sealant, to prevent fluids, gases, and electrical signals from being conducted from one utility line to the other. as well as provide thermal insulation for fluids within the smaller diameter utility line. Again, lower one, sensors would be applied throughout the corridor for monitorization and maintenance preparedness. Managing significantly less volume of stormwater provides the opportunity for engineers to form a plurality of water resources, providing flexibility in routing water from a desired source to a desired destination, again by this discharge line in 117. I know this is complicated, but I wanted to use the opportunity to let you all know. So where does this water go? The plan view diagram depicted in Figure 9 provides an example of how this system would be applied over a large geographical area. 302 represents an urban core, while 304 represents a rural area. As previously addressed, high-density urban cores are characterized by high amounts of impervious surface and sometimes have minimal opportunity for natural drainage, while rural areas provide more flexibility for various types of infiltration. Each distributed utility system would operate through a water management control system discussed in the previous slide and represented in 110. Manifolds best appropriating water resources and water destinations based on current atmospheric conditions would be noted. It is recognized that additional treatment of water from stormwater discharge lines may be appropriate, as represented there in 210. Utilizing the 2.5 million current stormwater treatment assets across the U.S. would also be integrated into this design. The utility housing corridor also represents and includes telecommunication utility lines. This is intended to address the issues surrounding fifth generation cell data technology. 5G operates at a much higher radio frequency than previous generations. At 24 to 52 gigahertz, this frequency has difficulty traveling long distances, whereas 4G is able to travel from antenna to antenna over the course of miles. 5G signals typically travel no greater than 1,000 to 1,500 feet. 5G also operates in smaller cells when compared to previous generations, which means more users in a given area impact the range in which 5G can serve. Studies also indicate that 5G has trouble passing through some walls and windows around the corner of buildings and can be disrupted by atmospheric conditions, all of which are continuing to impact the performance and reliability of 5G telecommunication lines, especially in dense urban areas. Figure 15 is a plan view depicting how our distributed utility system can be implemented in part of a telecommunication system. The arrow indicates our sidewalk retrofit. Now this is, again, above ground, an aerial view. S1 and S2 depict two intersecting streets. The figures in 616 and 618 represent the existing manhole covers, which provide access points for installation of the utility housing corridor. Once installed, optical fiber cables would enable cities with the capacity or the capability to transmit 5G cellular signals at an estimated high bandwidth of 10 gigabytes per second. Since optical fiber needs to be transmitted to an antenna for wireless transmission, installing antennas on utility poles located inside the manhole access point provides frequent and reliable transmission of high bandwidth telecom. This can be installed at the same time as the utility housing unit. Wireless repeaters installed within our sidewalk provides 5G and future telecom systems with the capability of increasing cell size while providing reliable wireless connectivity. These repeaters can be placed every 50 feet or less, enabling a trusted network for pedestrian and passing commuters. As part of our design concept, prefabricated repeater units will be engineered into the retrofit design, in order to easily maintain repeaters and enable access for future generation telecom. These repeater units lead us to the final feature of our distributed utility system. Now we'll go back above ground here. Our prefabricated repeater units, although varied in size, design, and frequency of installation within the design concept, provide installers with the capacity of storing power. Photovoltaic solar cells using bifacial solar panels will connect the energy utility line with the housing corridor. This line will then connect to capacitors within the prefabricated repeater units. Reliable 5G connectivity and renewable energy is critical in developing the smart cities of the future. As we head more into the direction of autonomous vehicles, building infrastructure that embraces the technological built environment is absolutely critical. We believe this starts with rethinking utility at its foundation. To assist in the ecological, technological evolution of green infrastructure, we strive to plant nature's footprint back into our communities whenever possible, alongside our upgraded sidewalks in collaboration with community nonprofits who are already doing this work. A great example would be organizations similar to that of the Spokane Lands Council, who has developed a Spokanopy program intended to plant trees in Spokane's disadvantaged communities to improve air quality and prevent urban heat island effect Dr. Henning talks about so often. These types of partnerships can deepen our ecological footprint while installing the distributed utility system. As noted before, the potential for our distributed utility system begins at the sidewalk with the installation of our permeable material technology. Since the early 90s, permeable pavement has been used in limited application to promote infiltration of stormwater through hard surfaces into the native soil. For years, however, we've heard from industry professionals that this technology is great in theory, but in practice will fill and clog with sediment over time, limiting its infiltration capacity over time. By increasing the pore size and frequency of this pore size in permeable pavement, we've developed a technology that has demonstrated a resistance to clogging. This material technology is precast into place, similar to that of precast concrete, while utilizing a patented binding agent that functions without the use of Portland-based cement. Now that's a huge factor. Some of you may know CO2 in concrete. Concrete's one of the largest emitters of CO2 on the planet. Our research and development indicates this binding agent is potentially compatible with upcycled materials, supporting a business model that adheres to industrial symbiosis or closed circle economics. We want to use waste to build this sidewalk material. Our team is currently in the pilot manufacturing stage of progressing this material technology into commercialization. Located at Spilker Precast, locally right here in Spokane, our team has spent the last 2 years optimizing various mix designs to be compatible with precast manufacturing processes. This includes the procurement of raw materials in conjunction with our evolving mix designs. Lastly, we have outlined formal testing and certification for this material technology. This testing will be in conjunction with the Department of Ecology's Treatment Assessment Protocol, or TAPE certification. This program presents a gateway for national recognition of the permeable material technology and ultimately the distributed utility system as stormwater policy, which I've closely followed for the last 5 years, continues to evolve. It's important to note that our engineering, procurement, and construction management model is in many ways in its infancy. Our team focuses now on optimization of our permeable material technology, aligning the procurement of materials, allocating agreements with existing precast manufacturers, exploring opportunities with third-party engineers. This is just to name a few. Having said that, we recognize that collaboration now is key to our success and are working diligently to meet the needs of pilot project opportunities all over the nation, but especially down in the LA basin. As we ride on the tails of inspiration from Cardinal Czerny's visit to Gonzaga, I'd like to finish this evening with a quote from Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti encyclical, which is as follows: "Hope is bold. It can look beyond personal convenience, the petty securities and compensations which limit our horizon, and it can open us up to grand ideals that make life more beautiful and worthwhile. Let us continue then to advance along the paths of hope." Pope Francis, Fratelli Tutti 55. Thank you all for attending this evening, and I hope you've taken something from today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was great.
Thank you.
So we got time for discussion, questions. We got a microphone, maybe someone to run it for me. Thanks, Laura. I think we have one over there.
Thank you.
What is the difference between like a cement sidewalk and this new permeable sidewalk? Are they anywhere near close to each other, or maybe even cheaper, the permeable one?
Yeah, cost is still something that we're very focused on as we evolve our mixed designs. Procurement of the material is something that we are definitely factoring in. That's why it's important for us to use upcycled material or waste material. For example, there's mine tailings all over our country, and they sit in large pits the size of lakes, and they're called Superfund sites. And ecology is worried about the leaching of those materials. If we can give those materials an acid bath and use them to build infrastructure, our cost model will significantly decrease. But that's something we're taking into account right now as we build.
You said something also about recycled materials, so was that what you were thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also shale, lots of different aggregates around the country that are really considered waste. And so we want to use that as an opportunity in line with our unique binding material that acts similar to Portland-based cement to work with that material and provide, upgraded sidewalks. Great question.
Got another question over there.
All the schematics you had
Yeah.
a lot of water sensors. Are those all just like floats, or are there other types of sensors? And if so, are they accessible by people? Because sensors tend to fail after a while. So
Absolutely. One of the things that we know is important is the cybersecurity aspect. You can't build a water Chernobyl, and we're very aware of that. So that's one factor. But in terms of the types of sensors themselves, they're relatively cheap. They're easy to maintain, they're easy to upgrade, and they're easy to monitor. And so that's one of the greatest features, we believe, of the entire system, is managing water in real time and doing it as efficiently as possible. And those sensors are a huge, huge piece of that. Great question.
So as far as how the two, this is the second time I've heard your presentation, so I'm able to sort of processing through it. So we've got the permeable sidewalks. Is the idea there that reducing the total amount of volume of water that would be going into the system, and then you would use the extra space within those 3.5-foot tubes to then, so am I understanding the relationship between those
Absolutely.
two correctly? Okay, so you've got the existing, pipes, and you would reduce the volume, and then fill it with other things like 5G or broadband or electricity?
Yes, the utility housing corridor. So there's a plethora of utility units. And we call, the big word we use is real estate, right? We all understand that term, and right now, the real estate is used for stormwater. Those 3.5-foot wide pipes that are reaching capacity in Chicago, they're meant for one thing, and that's for stormwater and sewage. But if we're able to drastically reduce the volume of stormwater that goes into those gutters, what do you do with the pipes? And that's what has us excited.
Gotcha. So in Spokane, I don't know if you're knowledgeable about the combined sewer overflow tanks that we just finished up, right? So we just spent a ton of money trying to reduce the amount of water going into the river by creating these enormous tanks all over the city. Is that a version of what Chicago was doing?
Absolutely, and I have some pictures actually from Spokane. I don't know if I can pull those up. In the presentation that Dr. Henning provided me the opportunity to speak with some of the PhDs here at Gonzaga, the example I used was not Chicago or LA. It was actually right here in Spokane. Now I believe we've spent $350 million on roughly 36 stormwater treatment tanks. And again, that's built with data from the Atlas 14 based on 1973. And so I believe this was in 2019. A half inch of rain fell in 20 minutes on 3 neighborhoods here in Spokane. And this is not something that's unique to just major metropolitan areas. Of the 9,500 municipalities, either dense urban or rural, flooding issues exist all over the country.
I promise we weren't planning this out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the CSOs, those combined sewer overflow tanks, I believe recently already filled and then we're discharging, once they're full, then we discharges into the river again. So would the idea be to reduce, allow more infiltration into the ground, less into the system, less into the river?
Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing about this system is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You don't go into a city and say, your entire city and every sidewalk needs to adopt this practice. But it's a form of decentralized infrastructure. So you provide the opportunity for municipalities and their lead engineers to say, look, these 2-3 neighborhoods are really the problem spots, and you can pocket this technology in those areas to directly solve some of the issues that you're facing in the Spokane River.
Kevin, I had a question. You're talking about putting like utilities, seems like 5G and internet or whatever, in your sidewalks, correct?
Yes.
It always seems like they're updating those things and changing. How would you have a plan for accessibility to those areas?
Absolutely. That's a great question. That's why installing the utility housing corridor into those existing pipes provides a chance to say, look, if you have issues in certain areas, that you can replace those by popping the manhole covers back off. The other thing with the 5G is we're using a low-frequency broadband cable that is installed within the sidewalk. And I don't know if I can go back to this slide, but we actually include the sidewalk, the curb line. No, I'm going too fast. The curb line on the back side of the sidewalk. And this is the area where the low-frequency broadband cable will be applied. But our goal is to have accessible utility infrastructure that can be replaced within pocketed areas. So, great question.
Is that the little black things?
That's an ADA compliant curb line. So I know we're all familiar with trying to pull into parking spots, and our hubcaps pay for it sometimes. So in this updated sidewalk, you'd provide the opportunity to rather hit that ADA compliant bump and be able to pull back in on the other side rather than constantly fighting the curb line. And the other reason is for electrification of scooters and bikes. 3 out of 5 accidents, as I had mentioned, exist because of that curb line. And oftentimes I ask people why the curb line exists, and most people say for safety. And although that plays a factor, a large majority it is because of stormwater capture. So it's for that updated sidewalk.
I was just wondering, is there a way to repurpose the existing sidewalk and those to make them porous?
That is a great question, and it currently, yeah. Oh yeah, I don't need that. So the question is, can you use the existing material that's in your sidewalks and recycle them to make permeable material? It really depends on the aggregate type that is used. It's something we've looked into, and we're seeing if that's possible. They actually already recycle existing sidewalks that they replace, so that's something that's built into our cost model.
Connect the climate dots again a little bit. You'd mentioned briefly that the total volume of water, and I think you meant over the course of the year, for example, is not likely, it may not change immediately. So we might, if you get 5 inches a year, you're probably still going to get 5 inches, but you're going to get it in probably fewer, larger storms, seems to be the pattern. So more moisture in the air. So resilient infrastructure would be able to handle larger, more infrequent storms. Is that part of the idea?
Correct, and it's a plethora of solutions. Again, we're not a one-fit-all solution, but we want to work with centralized water utility infrastructure, and our goal is to lessen the burden of those existing systems. That's really the concept. And to your point too, California, they get most of their rainfall in a 1 to 2 month period, and the rest is that drought. And so resilience means the ability to recover more quickly from these storms, and that's really where the ticket falls.
So what would you say is the biggest impediment for a community like Spokane to do something like this? And if you were to try to figure out what's the main impediment that you're trying to overcome right now, is it technological or something else? We've talked to the city about this concept. There is a stigma behind green infrastructure or existing green infrastructure. That is the bioswales or big dips of grass you see. The city's tried, I call it traditional permeable pavement methods, where the void space is large, but 5-10 years after the project's installed, it's deteriorating or it's clogged. And so there is a bit of a pushback or some fear behind installing a new system. Having said that, when we become pilot ready and these mixed designs are optimized, we're a building material, we do plan to approach the city more formally about, we call them pilot projects. We're not going to replace all the sidewalks overnight. Small pockets in high impact neighborhoods is what we'll approach. So I'm hopeful that we'll work with the city of Spokane.
I know, and some of the talk about Spokane was trying to make the sidewalks more safe for pedestrians, and the no curb, I can see, would have its advantages because you don't fall off the curb, but I know some of them are in, and this is not a good example because you have lots of trees and grass, but there's a lot of parts of the city where it's all concrete, and so there's no shade for people to walk, there's no, like trees or grass or anything like that. Would that also be then incorporated into this particular walkway?
Yeah, absolutely. That the picture represented is more in a long plat subdivision, but in dense urban areas, it is really important for us to re-implement that ecological footprint where planting trees becomes an option. One ticket there, golden ticket idea, is utilizing easement strategies. So going into neighborhoods and providing ideas to neighborhood councils that say, look, if we can go in 4 feet onto your property line to plant native soils and trees, is that something you'd be interested if we're also upgrading your energy, internet, and making your water, the system overall flood less? And so it's critical for us to apply that green footprint as we upgrade the sidewalks. And they also call many of the design concepts that implement green infrastructure complete street concepts. So if you have an area that's 45 miles an hour and has 4 lanes of traffic, the city, discusses new ideas where you reduce the lanes to 1 each way and then lower the speed limit to 35 miles an hour. But by reducing the lanes of traffic, you now have much more square footage to say, we put in bike lanes, electrification areas, and then you have more of a natural sidewalk that's much more pleasurable to walk on. You're not right next to those cars.
Sprague and Monroe.
We can go on and on. I don't have any slides for them, but.
Hi there. One question I think is more fun, and then one is more technical. I feel like there's a lot of concepts here, but to break it down into 2 categories, there's the sidewalk, and then there's the below ground real estate.
Yeah.
Which of those came first?
The permeable concept started about a decade ago. When I was down at Washington State, there was a technology that was being researched for recycling materials to make permeable pavement. But I really felt that the pore size impeded on the technology. And so for the last decade, I've really focused on the permeable pavement aspect. And the rest of the utility management came after. Starting in 2015, our inventor, Matt Russell, a lot of what I presented today isn't necessarily my brain, it's the work of his genius. And so we've slowly evolved over time.
Yeah, it's a great idea. The more technical question then is, at what point, obviously concrete today it's impermeable, so it's just a river of water. Like if I go for a run in the rain, I'm just, splash, splash, splash every step. At what point does your permeable concrete become that?
Yeah.
Like I know you had the water pour slide, and that was illustrated beautifully. But at what point does it it can't?
Yeah, and that is a great question. Again, you guys are on it. This is a design concept, and I'll be the first to tell you it is not yet an engineered design. The plan for that capacity problem, I'll call it, is really based on the native soil. So you have 4 soil types, A, B, C, and D. Type A is your most permeable, and type E, you see down in Pullman with that clay, it's virtually impermeable. So the depth of those detention tanks will be based on the native soil. But the engineers that we've discussed with and hope to partner with in the future say that's an engineering problem and ultimately a solution. What area of impervious surface are you taking on? How wide is your existing roadway? What do you anticipate that volume being based on extreme storm events? And then we'll create our engineered design from there.
Is your question though, how quickly would the pavement become impermeable? Would it be, when does it become not, allowing water to infiltrate? Was that your question?
Pretty much, yeah. Inch of rain per hour or whatever.
Yeah, inches per hour based on the calculation of impervious surface that you'll take on. The other issue is clogging. We won't say that all of our panels won't clog. We haven't been in the ground for 50 years. And so maintenance is a key portion to keep that pore size open. You need to get that street sweep equipment out into your communities and cleaning your sidewalks.
So Gonzaga, and I'm not sure, my sense of time, especially with COVID, is completely out of whack, but a few years ago, I will say, we poured some permeable concrete at Astor and Sharp. And so I thought it was a civil engineering project to monitor how quickly it clogs, whether we have winter heaving problem with ice, which it hasn't, which is interesting. So have you connected with the folks doing that, and how was that? Do you know? I know that's not your project, but I'm curious. They've been in there for a few years.
We were aware of that senior design project back almost during its inception. I know it changed hands with the various students that took on the project, but we're really proud of the university for taking on green infrastructure concepts and to push the note to see what's possible for our community. So I'm really proud of the city and for the university on installing that project, and we'll see.
Do you know if it's clogging?
That I can't answer.
Okay.
Yeah,
Anybody here
that
know? We have any civil engineers here? Darn it, I invited them. All right. Maybe one more question.
Along those same lines, are you familiar with, out at Finch Arboretum, the parking lot that has been paved? And can you comment on the issues and problems, that didn't meet what we had hoped?
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of the project itself, mostly because I wasn't involved in that project. What I can say is two of the major issues that Spokane has experienced with permeable pavement strategies has been in the winter months when water expands, it freezes, it expands, and you have really deteriorating installations of permeable pavement. And so as we attempt to build a material that can exceed freeze-thaw parameters, we hope to provide a material that can withstand winter events. Again, I'm proud of the city for taking on those projects, and I think permeable pavement has its place, but I will say for it to be mass adopted, it does need to evolve as a technology.
Let's thank Kevin Kunz one more time.
Thank you.
As I get my laptop here, just wanted to remind you that we have 2 more events this semester that we'd encourage you to attend. They're both free. The first one on April 3rd is in person in here, and then the second one will be online on Zoom here. Make sure you sign up for our mailing list so you hear about future free events, and support us if you're able to learn about climate change and how it affects our lives. Thanks so much for coming. Hope to see you again soon.